and mostly, and this domestic debt cannot be deferred, cannot be forgiven, because it's all owed to institutions and individuals like me and you. So one thing that will be added into this model is a debt legislation ceiling to make sure that the hands of the government are tied in terms of borrowing excessively like we see today.
Okay, so the plan is within 5 years. How feasible do you think this is?
See, where there is a will, there is a way. And in leadership, as far as I'm concerned, my understanding of leadership, you don't lead expecting. You have to dirty your hands. And once Bill Gates said that if you're afraid to fail, you will never succeed. You have to start somewhere. And with a concerted effort and a team that's dedicated to a mission, anything and everything is possible.
Okay, so we move on to the next point because I know a lot of people have understand already point one, and that is to reform, make it some reforms like the civil service. How do you intend to reform the civil service?
Well, the civil service has been inefficient. It is bloated, and also there's a lot of, it's not transparent in terms of in management of public funds, and we think the civil service can do better. And also there is the staff, civil servants are not motivated, the salary is poor, there are no incentives, there are allegations of corruption within the civil service, especially at high level, at the high level. Now, what do we do to make sure the civil service serves? It's supposed to serve the public. And if it's not serving the public, it's maximum, then that's a problem. So the idea is to reform the civil service, to inject standards in the civil service, to inject professionalism within the civil service, to make sure it is efficient and effective, and make sure it makes use of technology to serve. I don't have to come from Basse to apply for a passport or a driving license or any basics. I can still be in Basse and get access to public goods that I want, and so many other issues. So the idea is to reform the civil service, make it efficient, streamline it, make sure it is compatible to 21st century public sector, and make sure that it serves the people, and make sure that the civil servants are professional, and also there is ethics, there are standards, and then there are performance evaluations that we can do, so that we don't just give job to people, they'll be there for 30, 40 years, not delivering, yet they are there until they retire. So performance-based evaluation, there are standards. So then the idea is to do that. But I agree with Nyang, like he said, all these things you need everybody should know their shortcomings. I, as a politician, I know my limits. I know what I can, what I cannot do. That is where the experts come in, the economists. That's why I bring, look, how do we reform the civil service? This is why the politician has a vision. This is why I want to take the Gambia to. To make it happen, it is the experts you bring together. This is kind of civil service I want. A more efficient civil service that makes use of technology, that serves the people, that is corrupt-free, that is efficient and professional. How do we achieve it? The experts now will build a framework to achieve it. But then again, it's linked to the state-owned enterprises as well, because if you reform the civil service and not the state-owned enterprises, there's a problem. In NAWEC, let's say NAWEC, for example, how do we reform NAWEC? Because NAWEC, most of the problem is management. If management is not right, the three other components, generation, transmission, distribution, and commercial cannot be right. That's why we've been having problems. We've seen that generation has been a problem, energy generation. How do we really reform NAWEC in terms of management? Nyang is from Nyang's school of thought. He believes that some most to be privatized, like the UK did recently. Like when Reagan came, Reaganomics, he privatized most of this. Still don't know. When Thatcher came, Thatcherism, she also privatized. When BT was privatized, and most of these big corporations. Should we do that in Gambia? If we are going to do that, which one should be privatized? Should Gamcel go? Should NAWEC stay? If it stays, what kind of management will it be? Should ports go? Should we divide ports into two so that ferries go into transportation and then the other one stays? NAWEC, what do we do with NAWEC? Do we separate water from electricity, or do they stay together? If they stay, who manages NAWEC? Is it still the government is it still the press that employs their manager, or you give it a private firm to manage? Even though government owns the asset, but a private firm manages it based on reliability, based on deliverables, and so on and so forth. So the idea is to come up with those ideas, to reform the civil service, reform the state enterprises, so that they are fit for purpose. You create institutions to serve a purpose. If they don't serve that purpose, that's a problem.
Yeah, so in one of your discussions, you mentioned issues of margin some ministries and also maybe removing some.
Yes.
So what about that?
What we've realized is that some of the ministries were created in the 70s, in the 80s. So you create institutions to deal with today's challenges and also tomorrow's challenges. The ministries that exist, some of them are not, some duplicate each other. Some are not fit for purpose. They need to go. You need to merge some ministries, remove some, bring in new ministries to deal with today's challenges. Today we have challenges of climate change, terrorism, youth unemployment, and so on and so on. But also we have to think that in 2050, 2060, we need to start building the country for that. I need to create those institutions now that can make sure that what jobs will Gambians need in 2050? You look at global trends. We are going towards artificial intelligence, towards drones. How do we change the education system? Because what I don't want is for my child to go to UTG and has a degree in development studies now. Before 2029, he graduates, and that course is redundant. That is not a job for him in the world anymore. So how do we change the curriculum so that we prepare the child for jobs that have not been created yet? And one of the things is to look at the ministries and see what new ministries do we need. We've been having Minister of Agriculture since then. We cannot still feed ourselves. How do we have Minister of Agriculture and Food Security to ensure that we feed us? How many billions of dollars has been spent into the Minister of Agriculture through loans and grants? What have you seen? We still cannot feed ourselves. Look at Minister of Youth and Sports. Why do you manage? Youth alone is a critical sector. Why do you merge it with sports, for example? These are some of the things that we are thinking. Innovative ways of governing.
Okay, so the national chairman.
Let me just add to that. Thank you very much, Nyan. Let me say this. Let me extend the definition of civil service a bit and call it public service. And when I say public service, I mean mainstream civil service, including the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises. Because really, you see, the state-owned enterprises is really an extension of the civil service. Okay? Now, why do we have a public enterprise? Government establishes a public enterprise because it has a service, a national service to provide, a public good to provide. But it realizes that that public good can be provided in a effective cost recovery manner. That is, at least it will be provided in such a manner that the cost of providing it could significantly be recovered, even if government is going to subsidize an element of it. And that is why Nyang said they were created as a result of the necessity of the time when they were created. We must make a conscious effort now to determine whether, in fact, those institutions continue to be relevant as they are. If they are not, then we take them off the radar. How do you take them off the radar? The service will still be provided, but you privatize it because the service can be provided by private sector, and even it will be provided even more efficiently and more cost effectively, and it will be cheaper to the consumer. And it will be available in abundance and reliable. So these are decisions that this government will have to make, or any government that really wants to bring transformation will make. Now, the civil service includes even government structure. What is government structure? It's the various ministries that constitute government. And the civil service are the non-politicians that work in those ministries. So the civil service is a tool for public administration. So that tool must be fit for purpose. It's like you going to clear grass in your garden and you take your cutlass and you hit the grass and nothing is going. What do you do with it? You take it and you go and sharpen the edges. If it's not going to work, then look for something else. That type of grass cannot be cut by a cutlass. Look for something else to cut that type of grass. So the civil service needs to be reformed. The tool needs to be the appropriate tool to deliver the strategy for transformation of the Gambia into a developed nation, a nation where people will live in dignity and stability. At the moment, as Doctor has said, it is not fit for purpose. It is overbloated one. It is In fact, the skill set of the civil service itself is a problem. The systemic framework of the civil service is not in sync with the realities of the Gambia's need for growth. And remember, the civil service is a very important tool because the civil service has a catalytic effect on the efficiency of all other sectors, including the private sector. If you have a poorly organized and inefficient civil service, the ramifications travel right down to the rest of the economy. And now you talked about the various ministries. You know, when Yahya Jammeh was defeated in the elections in 2016, one of the first things I expected that a new government will do is to ask itself the question: the structure of government, which is the composition of the ministries that constitute the framework of government, is this what we need to do what we need to do during the transition period? And the opportunity would have been the transition government to actually restructure government, including restructuring government is restructuring the political makeup as well as the administrative makeup. But you know, all we did since the 2016 election is to have removed the president, the former president, and the ministers, but we left all the structures and operated them the same way they have been operated. Right. So what then was wrong? We are now unable to convince the people that something was wrong. And unfortunately, people tend to think, oh yes, Yahya Jammeh saf mo don gen fumneni because fumneni yun dan sona. God forbid, Yahya Jammeh gen kenen. You know? But that is what we are getting. So it is because politicians and governments are not asking the right questions. They are not generating the right frameworks and investing in them to bring about the type of development and the type of transformation that people were expecting.
Oh, okay, just to remind the listeners, you are listening or you are watching the CA Talk Show. And today we are talking about the 10-point plans and specifically we are talking about Plan 1, and that is the issue of corruption reforms. And boosting the economy. So at the very last 10 minutes, we will take some of your questions that are on the Facebook page. But before that, we will allow Yang to analyze this whole civil service thing.
Thank you. Civil service is fundamental to the progress of any country because they are the auxiliary staff of the political class. They make things happen, hence the reason they're called technocrats. Now, fundamental within civil service reform is security of tenure.
Mhm.
Why security of tenure? A civil servant must be protected from being fired by the political class. And that's the first tool of empowering a civil servant. Then what's the next step? Retooling and rekitting their toolkit set. What is that? Training that is specific to the services and jobs they're going to do. Do we have that in the Gambia? No. Today, I'll tell you, 25 years ago or 30 years, if you walk into the Ministry of Finance, the aggregate experience of the technical class can reach easily 2,000 years. What does that mean? Mr. X, DPS, 45 years. Mr. X, PS, 30 years of service. Today, take the whole ministry. You cannot even have 600 years of experience aggregate combined. What does that mean? We have people who are not tried and tested, and we are giving them duties that affects the lives and livelihood of a whole nation. This is the problem our country finds itself fundamentally. So civil service reform is not only needed, but it is the first tool that any government must take to bring in the much about changes we want. Because I used to have a professor that said, you cannot make chicken salad out of chicken waste. I don't want to use the word, but chicken waste is a more nicer word. So therefore, what we need is people who are fit for purpose to be able to deliver services that will in return bring social dividends to society. Then on the issue of the SOEs, in business, you have what you call stars and dogs as it relates to companies. What are the stars of the government of the Gambia in terms of the SOEs? Show me SOEs that are doing good in the Gambia. Maybe Gam Petroleum is a star. It's a healthy SOE that is bringing in money and it's not a liability to the greater good, us, the owners of that enterprise. Gamtel, it's a public liability because the loans that are under the neck of that SOE are borne by us. So what can government do? And that's why government in the past used to have what you call a diverse teacher program. To the point, government created an office called the Gambia Diverse Teacher Agency. The Gambia Diverse Teacher Agency, with the help of the World Bank, created what you call Track 1 and Track 2. Track 1, companies that are ready to be sold as is. Track 2, companies that we need to refit so that they create value and we sell them. Now, NAWEC, before I give in, we have an issue here and we need to understand the dynamics of power marketing has changed. Government of the Gambia, by way of NAWEC, need to own the transmission lines from Banjul to Koina. Everything, we own it. Then generation, we give it out to companies. So the liability of repairing generators, paying mechanics, importing parts is borne by private sector. They provide energy. We promise to sell it and give them their money at the end of a given period that is accepted. And that's what you call an IPP. Then once we do that, two things NAWEC's going to do: transmit power and billing. Then generation goes to the private sector. Then the burden of NAWEC is taken away. Then water. Water will always be a social deliverable because the cost of acquiring water and distributing it will always be more than the revenue collected. And that is the essence of a public enterprise. You step in where others don't step in. So that's a critical need to supply water and good water for that matter. So what we need to do is look at the state-owned enterprises and see where government is fit for purpose to continue to give a social service. And water is key, but it is high time that 100% of generation be born by private sector. Today, if you look at the Turkish boat, that's a very good example of power generation by a private sector, now collecting money and giving it back to them. So why can't we take all the machines, our machines in Kotu, sell it to private sector, let them run it, and all we do is we have a master meter before it gets into the transmission. We register what their output is, we collect it based on cash power sold, give it to them, then the headache for government is out. But today you have poor procurement of heavy fuel, people stealing, people bloating costs, and it's passed on to you and me. Then you have losses in transmission of over 21%.
Yeah.
21% of power generated by our machines is lost before it gets to this light bulb. And who is paying for it? You and me, by adding to the cost per kilowatt hour. So these inefficiencies are being borne by us because we have systems, public systems that are not functional, and public systems that are not serving the greater good's interest.
Okay, we have another point, that is corruption coming on. So because of time, also we will allow you all to, you will talk about it in Wolof, Dr. Mandinka, and then
You mean the summary of the
summary
discussion?
of the discussion
Okay.
later for our audience who might not be able to hear us right now. So about corruption.
Yes.
Everyone talks about corruption, but people say it is rather not possible to eradicate it. How would you eradicate corruption?
Well, like you said, corruption is a problem in the Gambia, both high-level corruption and low-level corruption. What we want to do is to ensure that we come up with these strategies that we think can eradicate corruption, at least. I mean, eradicate corruption. I mean, obviously, subjective. Some countries cannot be eradicated. Even the most Western countries, there is corruption. But we're bold enough. We know these are ambitious, bold enough to say eradicate, but at least to bring it to the most minimal level. One, by making sure that we get the right institutions, the right watchdogs. Currently, we don't have an anti-corruption commission in this country. We want to create the watchdogs that can even hold the president accountable, that have the power to even investigate the president where there is suspect of sleaze, of misuse of public funds. So that is one, build the right institutions. For example, I remember when the coalition just came, they promised that they are going to declare their assets. But later they decided to say, no, we'll declare, but not publicly. No, we need to have a system where public officials declare their assets publicly. So we know what they have before they get to power. And before they leave, they also declare what they have. So we know whether there are any differences. We also have to do an audit, lifestyle audit. If a young guy, for example, is a civil servant working at the Ministry of Finance, and his salary cannot afford him a Mercedes-Benz 2018 model or build a nice house, he needs to, it's not our responsibility as a state. It's his responsibility to explain to us how he got that money. If he cannot, then there's a problem there. These are lifestyle audits. That is at the institutional level. But also creating the systems where there can be transparency using technology, where we can go into a portal and see contracts for this whole year, how many contracts have been given, how much money was paid, who won the contracts, how did the procurement go. All these things should be transparent. So that is accountability. But also, when it comes to petty corruption, to make sure that we incentivize public officials. Because if you look at today, the salary of a public officer and his annual expenditure to survive is like, there's a huge discrepancy. So, and there are opportunities somewhere for them to make money. So therefore, we need to digitize and make sure that we reduce monetary transactions. Why should I go to the ports with a bag of money to customs to clear my goods? I can do that online. Where I go fill form, it directs me to a page where I make the payment, I get my reference number, I go get my goods. So we have to use technology, motivate staff, pay them good, remove the incentives for cash in society, but also do a lot of training. Because if corruption is our biggest problem, and the purpose of education is to solve a problem, yet there is no course in our classrooms that teaches our kids about public service, integrity in the public service, corruption, so that you grow up with that instilled in you, that public goods are not personal goods and how to deal with it. When you grow up with that attitude, it goes up. But also continuous training within the civil service to remind you of your responsibility as a civil servant. That is the training bit. But also punitive. Human beings are human beings. But We'll give the incentives, we'll motivate, but anybody caught in corrupt practices, we'll have to do legislation which is even worse than China, perhaps. China, not worse than China because they keep, but at least deterrence to know that there's a heavy penalty for you if you are found wanting. Because for me, let me just conclude. If you steal the money that was supposed to be used to buy medicine and beds and ambulances at the hospital, and it's not bought because it goes to your pocket, and somebody dies of an accident because he didn't get access to food care at that instant, you are responsible for his death. So through corruption, you can kill. Through corruption, you can destroy people's lives. Why? Because if you are supposed to invest in education and somebody steals that money, that child lacks access to good education, whether he's a disabled child or not, you are responsible for that child's failure. So we take corruption very seriously.
So how about the private sector? Is it only public sector?
I mean, the law applies to everybody. Like he said, the civil service works, like they said, works with the private sector. We have to also control the private sector. We need to fight, what do you call it again? Money laundering. Money laundering is also something which is a problem. So there'll be regulations, strong regulations, to ensure that there are frameworks that the public and the private sector works within to ensure our public finances are not wasted. But at the same time, also there is transparency and people can be held accountable for their actions, and there will be no impunity anymore in this country. What the government is today is a strong state within the context of a free market economy, which is strongly regulated.
So, Mr. Mendy, what would be your reaction to this? The eradication of corruption. Is it possible? How can CA do this?
Well, you know, like Yang said, you have to have the guts to start doing what you need to do to survive as a nation. And challenging as it is, corruption will have to be tackled head on, consciously. You know, corruption is like sin. You know, the human being is such that even the divine creator himself, he realizes that we continue to fail him on a continuing basis. And so when you listen to religious leaders give sermons, they effectively talk about the same thing. Submission to the divine will to do good to yourself and to your fellow person, as if you are doing it to yourself. But how many times do we find ourselves, in spite of whatever belief system you have, acting just contrary to that type of thing? That's the same thing as corruption. It's a challenge, but we will have to deal with it. And like Doctor has said, you know, we are going to deal with it from two perspectives. We are going to have the punitive perspective, but then we are going to have the proactive perspective to create frameworks that will make corruption unnecessary. So, and that is where, you know, your question about the private sector is relevant. Let me tell you this. I studied in Malaysia, and Malaysia is just next door to Singapore. In Singapore, a minister will commit suicide because he's made an error of judgment, which could be translated to corruption. You understand what I'm trying to say? So the manner in which they have educated their people about the ills of corruption and the importance of making sure that you stay clean, or you make a conscious effort to stay clean, it's such that it's permeated into their social fabric, and they are now morally and consciously defined by that. And as a result, they can even take their lives because they have made those errors. Imagine. So if we create a society like that, I am not saying that we might eradicate corruption completely, but we will eradicate it significantly.
Within 5 years, the first term.
Look, you know, public investment begins somewhere. Who says that a country can be developed only within 5 years? Nobody says that. But yet, countries think that 5-year periods or 4-year periods are reasonable periods to allow governments to begin their programs of transformation and development, and be able to create an appropriate direction, which they will continue if the people continue to trust them. Or with an other government, will come and learn from and pick up on and continue the transformation that the country needs. So really, the promise, you can only give a political promise within the legal mandate. And the mandate of a government is 5 years. And we will do whatever it takes to do it in 5 years. If we cannot, we are not the only citizens of this country. And we do not want to perpetuate ourselves in government. We will be in government for as long as the people think that that's the right thing to do. Or whether the constitutional instrument. We are there up to the period defined by the constitutional instruments, and somebody else will have to do that. But you know, governance, public governance is like a relay race. You know, relay? You have to hold the stick, and you have to run the best you can, and you have to deliver it in the best way possible. Don't drop it before you give it to the next person.
Yeah.
Because if he does not win, you also do not win. Am I understood?
So that is interesting. I mean, the re part of it. So, Nyang, you have heard them again talking about corruption when, a lot of people will say corruption is deep rooted in our society and it is rather not possible to eradicate.
Well, I will come to that first. I just want to reinforce and buttress what he said. Governance and the government is an infinite continuum. It continues. Public policy has what you call a lag effect. When you do something today, you don't get the stimulus or response instantaneously. but you set the pace for good things to come thereafter. Now, on the issue of corruption, I'm an economist, and economics is a behavioral science. We have a problem in the country, and the problem is cultural. Harbi fiñ ko takee laa lekkee. Njegi guru. No, think about it. Cultural things that are embedded in our minds as people. So it doesn't make it a sin. It gives it a justification. So that is the first thing we need to debunk. The one Jegi Guru, I'm a male and Jegi Guru. Ana attire bit. Any checkpoint you pass, the policeman say Ana attire bit. So it has been legalized and it has been mainstream into Gambian life. Accepted. I go to the airport, a porter gives me a cart. I am the one pushing it. He expects me to give him something for just giving me a cart that is meant for me to use. Expectations. So fighting corruption for me is threefold. One, there's a cultural revolution that Gambians need to embark on to fight corruption. After the cultural, you have policy. The policy, the best policy to fight corruption is to create a cash-free society. Because if you are corrupt and I transfer money into your account, I leave a trail. That becomes a deterrent for you to be corrupt. Because no one is seeing you, but a digital footprint is seeing you.
Yeah.
So that becomes something you're scared of. But if I come to your house 10 at night, you give me a box with 2 million for giving you a contract, that money doesn't have mouth or ears or eyes. So taking away cash out of the system is a way to fight corruption. And lastly, if you look at our procurement processes, they're the poorest. What does that mean? For every $100 million is spent on public good, we can safely say that no more than 50 to 60 goes directly to where it ought to go. The rest is fat, and that fat is divided like a slice of pizza for people to eat. So what do we need to do? Make sure that our procurement processes are stringent, streamlined, and rule-based. So there's no discretion. You see, wherever discretion comes to play, I have a right to say what and who gets what. But if it's rule-based, you can come from Calcutta, you can come from Gunjur. If you apply for something, the first point, you need 1, 2, 3, you exit, you're good. You need this, you exit, you're good. If you don't have it, you don't qualify. But so long as there's discretion in the processes, corruption will be endemic. And the unfortunate part, Yaya Jammeh was corrupt, but he centralized corruption. In today's Gambia, corruption has been decentralized and free for all. And I am yet to see one Gambian being penalized for corruption in the last 5 years. We had the fertilizer issue with agriculture. We had the fisheries ministry with all whatnot that has been happening. We have other cases that came up and no prosecution, no punishment, no deterrent. So what needs to happen here is a government that will come in and have a zero tolerance to corruption, notwithstanding with a zero tolerance, you cannot wipe away corruption, but you can contain it to minimal levels.
Yeah, so now we go back to you, Doctor. You know, you have made bold promises. And then to an extent, people say Gambians have lost faith in terms of promises because most of these promises, like Brikama, where you are from, they have been waiting for Wi-Fi for like ages. So how can you, or what would you say to Gambians to convince them to vote for you to ensure you realize these points?
Well, as a politician, what I can do is to sell my vision, that this is my vision. This is the Gambia I want to see in 5 years, in 25 years, in 50 years. But I think we should not be cynical as a people. We should not lose hope. Just look at also context is important, obviously, and also the man who makes the promise. If we have someone who says that when you are campaigning, you can make any promise, when you win, you can do whatever you want to do, obviously, that's a different case. But like I said, I don't control how people feel. What I'm influenced by is my actions and what I say and what I do. And as a politician, we at CA, we have sat and we could have made 2 promises if we thought that's only 2 we could fulfill. We made 10 bold and ambitious promises. And I think that's what Gambia needs, to be bold and ambitious, to think ahead. Today, we have a problem, like you said. I mean, the traffic in this country now is crazy to the point that you get irritated. But why? Because there was no vision. When we were building these small roads, maybe there were only 5,000 cars in circulation. They didn't think that in 2021, there'll be 10,000 cars. So you build roads for 10,000 cars, even beyond. And you also leave margins so that if you need to extend it. But that didn't happen. And at CA, we think that to build a country is not only for today, but that is why we came up with these very bold visions, these bold promises. And obviously, we are saying that if we cannot fulfill it, hold us accountable.
Okay, that means don't vote us in again.
Exactly.
So we go into the local text because there are people watching us right now, but they don't understand what we are talking about. So we will allow Nyang, he's very good in Wolof, to
we are summarizing.
Yeah, summarize to the audience in the Wolof language.
Jërëjëf dañ ma ooyoon fii ci ndaje li pour ma ñëw nekk koo xam ne faratew ma dama ñëw xool ñoom liñ bugg a def si suma gis-gis ak suma xel bu tuuti si li ma yàlla may ma déglu ko ñu faram fàcca seen gis-gis seen mébét fiñ bugg a yóbbu réew mi xool naa ko gis naa ne am na ci yoo xam ne lu mun a am la waaye ni moo mun a amee mooy ñoom ñu am seen gis-gis ñu oo ñi nga xam ne yàlla may na leen pour ñu jël gis-gis boobu omba ko def ko loo xam ne dina mun a njëriñ askan yi Gambia benn ñaareel wax nañ ci affaire yi compagnie yi nga xam ne nguur gi moo ko moom nguur waruta nekk ci business dafa war a def ñi nekk ci business ñu yanja waaye mënuñoo amee mbilib mi ba pare bugg a fo ci biir géew gi waaye foo xam ne ñi nga xam ne ñu ngi ci géew gi di liggéey nanguwuñ faa duga nguur amatut dara ba duga ci loolu pour def ko waaye jamono daf dee dox ba la taxoon nguur di def amatut njëriñ mu def ko lu mel ni téléphone fii dañ amoon cable and wireless mu jógee fa ñu am Gamtel ñu am GSM ñu am Gamcell mu nekk fi rek di ñu jox mobile waaye jamono dem na ba am na ñetti compagnie yoo xam ne ay nit ñoo ko moom ñu nekk ay compagnie dem nañ de def nañ loo xam ne liñ mun tey ci wàllum téléphone compagnie bi nga xam ne Gamcell la nguur gi tëral ko munut ko kon waxtu jot na nguur gi gis ne compagnie bi day amoon na njëriñ 1997 1998 waaye tey 2021 amatul njëriñ te àdduna si yépp gis nañ lu mel noonu boo demee America da nga amoon Bell South Bell Atlantic bi deregulation ñëwee ñu teg ko dogat ko nga am US Sprint MCI AT&T ñooñu transform nañ telecommunication to a level boo xam ne su doon Bell South mu ngi fi tey ak Bell Atlantic duñ doon mun a def loolu lii moo tax ñuy dee bugga compagnie yoo xam ne ñi ko moom private sector bi ñoo ko amee li te flexibility for investment innovation fa la dee ëppee compared to lu nguur gi di control kon nag ñoom ci direction boobu noonu man mun naa see d'accord ak ñoom ne loolu it will bring